Okay, we are dealing with the US-sponsored NATO bombardment of Libya, fact and fiction. Previous two lectures, which should also be viewed. Now, if you haven't viewed them, a number of improvements were made in Libya, such as universal education, much of it post-secondary, etc., that have not been accounted for in the media, and Libyans appreciated these improvements, although they may not have appreciated Gaddafi. Unanswered questions: why is NATO taking the lead in the war rather than acting as a no-fly zone enforcer, and the rebels themselves actively prosecuting the war? The rebels are receiving weapons. They control the eastern part of the country. There's no need for NATO to be unleashing 5 different militaries at a small country like this. Libya spends $1 billion a year, or $2 billion perhaps, on military, whereas the United States and its allies spend $800 billion, or even $1.5 trillion a year. It's absurd bullying. Yet General Gates, Secretary Gates, complains the Europeans aren't spending enough on militarism. The Libyan loyalists have offered elections within 90 days. They've been ignored. Apparently, we don't have to deal with them. We can trash them. We can collectively punish the loyalists by refusing to even acknowledge their offer to go to the ballot box instead of the bullet box. Seemingly, that isn't a good idea. The U.S. is in a position to decide that with its NATO allies, that there will be no ceasefire, and that they will continue to act as a proxy for the rebels. Or really, it's the rebels acting as a proxy for the Westerners, isn't it? And Louis Farrakhan has provided a speech about this. And you'll forgive that I have a bit of passion and that I'm not entirely capable of being neutral. These facts have been upsetting, and I hope you can commiserate, even if you disagree with me. So the fact that Libya had developed a lot of these advanced indexes has been completely ignored by the media. And the media should really be hung out to dry for this. CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox News, to a slightly lesser extent PBS. You're all guilty of not having read a simple dossier prepared by an assistant on Libya and dealt with it and said, what does this tell me about the story that we're bombing the most advanced country in Africa? Certainly should be mentioned, shouldn't it? But no, the scenario is freedom-loving Americans are helping freedom-loving Benghazians throw off a despotic regime. But in reality, the reality is much more complex than that. That is not why the U.S. is there now. On the day of the Benghazi threat by Gaddafi to go in and go house to house, where they neglected to inform that in that speech he said he would give amnesty to anyone who laid down their weapons. He was specifically talking about what he considered to be an outlaw movement, as it would be here in the United States, of armed people refusing to put down their weapons. And as a result, we got the NATO Resolution 1973, which we promptly used to enforce a no-fly zone by destroying their military, which meant killing lots of young men who are defending their country. It's not a clinical thing to shoot a tank because there's a crew in a tank, and these are young men defending their country. It's perfectly legitimate for them to do it, and it's quite questionable for us to incinerate them. So at any rate, I will concede that perhaps there was a justification for the 1973 resolution to be activated. However, it's used to then be used to make NATO the primary hammer. It tells us that it was exploited and taken advantage of. Now that leads to question is that the reason the rebels didn't materialize in large numbers, they only materialized in numbers of around 1,500 in the initial attacks, when we thought just from the 2 Minister of Interior brigades that defected over, that should have been 8,000 men. It seems like they're holding men back. It's possible that they faked a feint back into Benghazi to be able to draw this out so that they got NATO involvement. It could have been part of a plan. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. We don't have that evidence at this time. But clearly, once the objective of safeguarding the civilians who would stay in Cyrenaica until they had sufficient arms to properly attack Tripolitania, with the massive countries in the Middle East disliking Gaddafi because Gaddafi armed rebels. He armed rebels such as Nelson Mandela of the African National Congress when we considered them a terrorist and supported the apartheid whites. He supported all revolutionaries. As a result, all these tyrants that we dislike and hate him because he's tried to give weapons and money to people, overthrowing them. And these are very arrogant men who've had very few threats to their regimes. And Gaddafi was often associated with one of them. So Gaddafi's son offered elections. That's what is so aggravating. Within 90 days, he said the Libya of my father is gone already. So the State Department went on to reject that. It's a little late putting proposals by Gaddafi in his circles for democratic change. So the official line is he blew up a plane, he kills and jails his own people, they're poor and educated, they want freedom, it's too late for peace, we need regime change. But each of these has a disturbing fact that contradicts it inconveniently. The U.S. bombed Tripoli, trying to kill Gaddafi before he blew the Pan Am jet up. It was his only major act of war directly since about 1985. In the meantime, the U.S. has gone on to cause 1 million deaths. They're a more peaceful country than ours, much less people in jail than ours. Per capita, they have 9,000 prisoners in the country, and we have 2 million. And it is a repressive regime, but as I said, it actually turns out they reinvested apparently more than one might assume. And on the one hand, we clamor for regime change. On the other hand, we claim we're not seeking it, which is the most bizarre form of doublethink I've ever seen. So we're going to look at these different metrics, and I'm going to post the sources. So in the case of education, you can see Libya has a high literacy rate. U.S., of course, is higher. Now let's look at some other aspects of this. These are the number of years people stay in school. And you'll notice that Libya actually, at 14, outperforms the United States at 24, and 14 and 24. And you'll see that the exams are rigorous, apparently, and that it's both sexes have equal enrollment levels, healthy enrollment levels at university, 6 million people, especially the Bay Area. There were 1.3 million students enrolled in primary school. So they have a fairly long school day, 6 days a week. So they have a very good school life expectancy. There's some serious issues with American civil rights, which is you can be put on a kill list, you can be indefinitely detained without trial, without habeas corpus, without being able to confront your enemies or call witnesses. And so the motivation for attack on Libya is some kind of an exertion of power. It's because we can. And the way to prevent that in the future is to hold these murderers accountable. Make them fear for their necks, as we made the Nazis fear for theirs. So then this brings us to the question of when I went out on the street and did polls of people, very few people even knew about